Hey everybody, I know we've got the numbers ticking up now, so we're going to get started in just a couple of minutes. So very happy to have so many folks joining us for this webinar today, so thank you. All right, it looks like the numbers, my little counter has leveled off just a bit, so I'm guessing that the vast majority of folks have now joined, and it's still going up, so welcome as folks are continuing to come on. My name is Brent Cohen. I am the Chief of Staff here at the Office of Justice Programs. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar about OJP's implementation of the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. And a huge thank you to so many of you who have been involved in this process, whether through conversations with us, conversations with other stakeholders, advocating, for some of the really important provisions that were included in this groundbreaking legislation that is allowing the Office of Justice Programs to do more good with communities across the country. And so really we wanted to take a moment and appreciate you all joining us to share a bit about how OJP and where OJP is in the implementation process of the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. I know many of you call it BSCA. I am not cool enough to do it, so I will continue referring to it by its whole name. I will very quickly just give you an overview of what the agenda looks like and then hand it off to colleagues who will be walking through it in more detail. As many of you probably know, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act appropriated nearly $300 million a year for 5 years, totaling $1.4 billion over that period of time for new and continuing grant programs. And you'll hear a bit about each of those 4 grant programs during the course of this webinar. It's really a significant undertaking for us, and we recognize how important this work is. We recognize how much work went into the legislation becoming possible. And so at OJP, we focused on making sure we were able to get these grant dollars out into communities as quickly and as effectively as possible, making sure we had stakeholder input as well as expediting process. And so those 2 things happen simultaneously, and you'll hear a bit about that from the subject matter experts in just a moment. Speaking with us about from the Bureau of Justice Statistics on the NCHIP supplemental funding will be Devin Adams, Deputy Director of the Policy Division at BJS. Speaking with us about the Community Violence Intervention and Prevention Initiative will be Betsy Griffith, Associate Deputy Director at BJA, and Eddie Bocanegra, Senior Advisor in the Office of the Assistant Attorney General. Speaking about the BJA Stop School Violence Program is Ruby Kazelbash, the Deputy Director for the Bureau of Justice Assistance for Policy. And speaking with us about the new Burn Skip program or State Crisis Intervention Program is Brenda Worthington, Associate Deputy Director at BJA. And then finally, the Extreme Risk Protective Order and Firearm Crisis Intervention Training and Technical Assistance Initiative Ruby Kazelbash will be coming back, again, Deputy Director at BJA, to speak with us about that important work. And then finally, we'll have time for question and answers at the end. We do plan to release slides following this webinar to make sure that we're able to get you all the information as well as share with others who may not have been able to join with us this morning or this afternoon, as I said minutes ago. So with that, I will kick it over to Devin Adams. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brent. Can you move on to the next slide? Thank you very much. The Bureau of Justice Statistics has been in the criminal history record improvement business for several decades now, and under BSCA, although I'm not at all cool enough to say it either, but it is shorter to say, we were appropriated $200 million for grants to states to upgrade criminal and mental health records for the National Instant Criminal Background Check System. And because we already have ongoing, long-standing grant programs, the flagship one being the National Criminal History Improvement Program, is the reason that we got the funding to do this, and also the reason that we're calling it the NCHIP supplemental funding. There isn't enough distinction really between our regular NCHIP solicitation and the BSCA money. The major distinction, of course, though, is the allowance of the juvenile record provision here. So grant funds can also be used to provide disqualifying juvenile information under 18 USC 922G or N. Again, that would be only for prohibitors for a firearm background check. And so we did not come up with a better name, unfortunately, but I do not want to confuse that this program is separate from our regular NCHIP solicitation that will be coming out later in fiscal year 2023. Next slide, please. So the $200 million that was appropriated is over a 5-year period, and it was immediately available when the bill was signed for 2022. However, we just could not turn that around that quickly and put out a solicitation at the end of fiscal year 2020. But we were able to combine the 2020 funds with the 2023 and put out a solicitation to make $80 million available for this fiscal year. The eligible applicants, as it did state on the previous slide, shall be available to, it said, to state criminal record repositories and state court systems. We make that a little broader to say state criminal justice agencies. The NCHIP agency in the states quite often is the state criminal history repository, but sometimes it is the state administering agency or other executive level branch agency. What I would just emphasize is we're only looking for one application from the state executive branch. We are happy to work with each state to determine which agency should be the one submitting. But state courts are also eligible applicants, which is distinct from our current NCHIP solicitation, where state courts can get funds, but it only as a pass-through agency. In this instance, state courts can apply separately, and it does not matter whether or not the state record repository is also applying. We can get 2 applications from the same state, one from the state criminal record repository and one from the state courts. However, I would emphasize we are looking for collaboration from those 2 entities, as the criminal record does require a lot of collaboration between the state record repository and state court systems. And I would also emphasize the fact that we are not making local agencies eligible for funding. We strongly suggest that state agencies, both courts and the repository, assess the needs of the local agencies to be able to pass funds through, but we are not able to accept applications directly from local law enforcement or local court agencies. And then finally, we have federally recognized tribes as eligible applicants. While that is not specified in the BISCA, it is under the Tribal Law and Order Act. Tribes are eligible entities under our current NCHIP solicitation, and they're also eligible under our NICS Act Record Improvement Program. So we saw no need to exclude them from this pot of funds. And then another thing that is very different from previous year NCHIP solicitations, there is no match requirement in the NCHIP supplemental funds. Typically, there's a 10% match under NCHIP, but I would just indicate that going forward in the 2023 solicitation, when we put that out, the match will be eliminated for that program as well. Next slide, thank you. So the priorities are very much the same, with the exception, oh, go back one, please, thank you. Very much the same as our regular NCHIP solicitation, with the addition of the juvenile component. This is certainly an area that we're still trying to figure out. The reason the juvenile information obviously is included in there is because it's called out in the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. And the intent obviously is to assist the FBI NICS section and the state points of contact who serve as the NICS or serve as the background check agency, to help them for folks who are attempting to purchase a firearm who are under the age of 21. There are more requirements to conduct an enhanced background check put on the NICS, and that does include reaching out to the state criminal repository, the courts and juvenile justice systems, mental health providers, and the local agency where the person resides to ascertain whether there may be a disqualifying juvenile record that would prohibit the person from getting a firearm. So funds will be available, provided that it does not counter to state law, to allow to potentially upgrade systems, may automate records, make it a little bit easier to do these checks for folks. I would stress though, we're not looking for states to make any changes to their laws to make more juvenile records available. That may have been the intent of Congress, but that's not our position. We are making the funds available for those states who are able to and interested in doing that. And then obviously case dispositions, out dispositions is our bread and butter, and it's something we're continuing to improve. The complete and accurate criminal history records are the backbone of the system, and we will continue to stress that as a priority area. And in the same vein, we're also supporting efforts to seal and expunge criminal history information when the state laws and policies provide for that. And we certainly want to make sure that records that should no longer be in the system have been appropriately removed and in a timely fashion. Next slide. And then here's just the schedule. We did put this solicitation out in the middle of November. Being very cognizant of the fact that we're going through the holiday season, we did allow to have it open for more than the typical 60-day time frame. The grants.gov deadline, which is really just making sure you're registered to apply, is February 21st, and the full application is due in Just Grants at the end of February. And we're anticipating making awards by late this spring, possibly early summer. Also understanding the fact that we will be putting out our regular FY23 NCHIP solicitation and the NCSAC Record Improvement Program solicitation probably in the February-March timeframe. So we will be very busy this year making awards to improve criminal history records. And that is all I have, and I'd like to turn it over to Betsy and Eddie.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Evan. I'm Betsy Griffith with the Bureau of Justice Assistance, and I'm going to be presenting today with my colleague Eddie. If we could move to the next slide, actually two, let's take it to the next one and get into the program. Really happy to talk about this. We've been lucky for about a year to be focused on the work around the Community Violence Intervention and Prevention Initiative, or CVI-PI, as we've developed the acronym. And this program really focuses on supporting communities and looking at the places and the people that are at highest risk for violence. And we see a concentration in many places of violence in locations in certain communities with persons that might be at risk not only for involvement in the violence, but also being a victim of that violence, and seeing an opportunity really to focus our efforts in a way that can help prevent future violence and help folks change and build different skills to be able to prevent this pattern that we've been seeing growing over a course of time. We're very lucky to have this amazing team, I'm going to talk about it in a minute, at OJP that really reflects both staff that have, through other programs, been supporting the work that is really the backbone of the Office of Justice Programs, and that is working with you all in the field and the amazing work you do every day on the front lines, to really learn and try and respond. And we really are trying to create a community where we can come together and build these comprehensive collaborative programs, which is not easy work, right? So this program really, as it says here, is to provide that funding for these partnerships to work across the disciplines, all the things that we know can be so important for this work. And doing that with these key principles, as I mentioned, that we're targeting it to where the greatest need is and the persons that are at highest risk for involvement in this activity. We see it happening in communities that need resources, and we really want to bring that equity and also, kind of recognize the larger impact of trauma and limited resources. Some of the persons that are working in this space and the communities, they need our help. And really, this is our opportunity to bring that focus and time. And also recognize that there really has to be that integration with public health and public safety. These are interventions that involve people, again, that are at high risk for involvement in violence. And folks need to have the tools to be able to work in that environment and to support the folks that have that credibility to be able to work and help folks make changes in their life. And to do it, we really want to do it in a way that we're learning from our opportunities and being able to build on it. Next slide. So how have we done it? This is really a priority all the way through the leadership in the Biden-Harris administration, as well as the Department of Justice. We got a little bit of a head start from some of the other programs here under Safer Communities because we actually received an appropriation last year for this program. And then we're very excited to increase that from $50 to $100 million partway through the year, with a commitment over 5 years really to continue to invest in this program. And one of the things that's unique is that we work across all of the Office of Justice programs. You'll hear from a moment from my colleague Eddie in the Office of the Assistant Attorney General, who is bringing a lot of experience and fresh experience to really help us, but working with our team here in the Bureau of Justice Assistance, who has been working in this space and working with communities and criminal justice partners around this kind of community violence, along with our colleagues at the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, OVC, and the National Institute of Justice. Next slide. So with that in mind, we launched 2 solicitations in the last year and plan to continue these into next year. We have our site-based solicitation that's going to be co-managed with OJJDP and OVC. And I wanted to mention as well that over time, we're also going to be working with the National Institute of Justice to be able to both support local research partnerships and activities within the programs, but also to support evaluations and learning in the sites. Next slide. Next slide. So what it is, as I mentioned, is that we're really trying to reach people where they are. And last year, and I think you'll see coming up, the focus, it allows the applicant to really submit a broad application based on need, and then also to be able to enhance existing projects. And I'm going to turn it over in a minute to Eddie to kind of talk about how that might play out. And eligibility includes both local and federally recognized government agencies, but also community-based organizations. So again, being able to build the capacity across the needs in a particular community. Next slide. I did want to mention that we have training and technical assistance that we're offering, and we're in the process of really building that up. We're going to work with 3 national partners, the Community-Based Safety Collective, LISC, and Heartland Alliance, who have experience working in this area, to work with the grantees and also to create a resource center and field support center so that resources are available to the field regardless of whether they have a grant. And then we're also, through this capacity building, really seeking to work with organizations that might work with community-based organizations that have less capacity. And with that in mind, I'm going to turn things over to Eddie to talk a little bit about both some of the work we've been doing to get information out there right now, and also to support, give you a sense of how we plan to support implementation on the ground. Eddie?
Thank you, Betsy. So sticking to this particular slide here, I know it's difficult to see the print, and as Brent mentioned, we'll be forwarding this information shortly. I think it's really important to build on some of the things that Betsy just mentioned. One, at the Office of Justice Programs, we are doing everything possible to be more inclusive in the way that we're making decisions, in the way that we're funding organizations, particularly those who are on the ground, who tend to be smaller organizations and have a lot of experience working with this population that I'll speak to in just a second. Part of that process for us is building this checklist that would allow us to have some common language and establish a common definition around what CBI really is and what it's not. It's also to provide accessible and realistic guidelines to the field. In other words, setting the expectations now, and then working through that process through our TH providers to continue to find ways to engage this organizations on the ground and find ways where they're able to apply either directly or indirectly for some of the resources. The other thing that I will mention around this checklist is that in strong efforts from BJA and some of our other programs here, really engaging stakeholders to help inform exactly what CBI really is. Who are we really trying to target? We know that gun violence tends to be targeted in specific communities and driven by a specific population that accounts for a large portion of the violence. And so what you see here with this checklist is an opportunity for us to kind of narrow that information, narrow that guidelines for us to ensure that we're leveraging these resources with a specific targeted population. Next slide, please. So the checklist is just one example of what we're doing here in a larger scheme of things in terms of our strategy around CBI. One of the other things that we've been doing very intentionally is identifying organizations that have established themselves in either a best practice or they're really being innovative in the way they're solving for some of the gun violence in their communities. Either the way they're partnering, the way they're partnering with research institutions or with local government, including law enforcement, and create a space from our end to be able to acknowledge their work, but ideally also to take those lessons learned and apply it with other organizations that are interested in learning more. This is our approach to building, in many ways, the capacity of the field. And so one of the things that we've also done here is produce a 5-part webinar series that really highlights a number of different things. The amazing part is that it's very well attended by individuals. The last one that we had just a couple of weeks ago, we had over 1,700 people register for these webinars, where we were focusing a lot on mental health and the trauma. And then we have another one coming up actually next week, where it's focusing on a research part. Next slide, please. There are several programs that we wish we could highlight. We have limited time here, but given the fact that we recently visited ROCA in Baltimore, and given the fact that they have some strong evidence to support their work, we want to take a second here to just really highlight a little bit about ROCA's work and why we think it's important and why we're also funding them. So there's probably about a handful of organizations that are going beyond one service. They're providing multiple services. They're collaborating with institutions, whether it's the mayor's office or police department or hospitals in many cases. And they're seeing and implementing a service that is really measured within a 4-year period. In ROCA's case, they're targeting a very specific population, those that are 16 to 24, that in most cases are being referred by law enforcement, who tend to be at the highest risk of gun involvement. Next slide, please. What's also important, and this is something that the field or people who don't truly understand the people that we're trying to target here, is that progress is not linear. People are going to relapse, whether people believe it or not. The streets tend to be very addictive. And when you think about young people living in these hyper-vigilant communities where trauma is constantly impacted the way that they're disseminating information or the way they go about navigating issues, it's really important that we think about how do we get individuals to really rethink about their process and the way they mitigate conflicts. One of the examples that ROCA and even like Ready Chicago and Advanced Peace are actually doing is kind of behavioral therapy. It's also relentless engagement. It's that they don't stop when an individual does not want to be engaged in a program. They're constantly engaging them, constantly finding ways to provide services for them, and in meeting people where they're at. And that's really critical when we think about this particular population that often have instabilities of housing, have mental health issues, and so on. Next slide, please. So again, one of the things that I want to just really highlight here is that the field of CVI for many, many years has been pretty stagnant. And but yet in the last several years, because of the increase of gun violence, we've had more attention given to this. And there's been more opportunities for local organizations to partner either with law enforcement institutions, whether it's the corrections, juvenile detention centers, or police, but also partnering with research institutions, partnering with hospitals to increase the effectiveness of their services. And I think that is definitely one of the things that the Department of Justice and OJP, we're continuously encouraging and trying to track. Lastly, as my colleague Betsy alluded a second ago, we have an opportunity here to really invest in the people who are doing this work. Too often we celebrate people who have experience, either formerly been incarcerated, or people who are survivors of gun violence or been formerly in gangs, and yet there's a toll that they actually carry. And so we have to think about how do we leverage the population who are still living in these communities in a way that is creating a viable opportunity for them to have a career in a space in the very same way that we do for other professions, whether it's medical or public safety and law enforcement. How do we look at this population as an essential and vital workforce in helping to create public safety? Next slide. And on that note, I'm going to pass it to my great colleague here, Ruby.
Thank you so much, Eddie. Next, we're going to talk about the Stop School Violence program. Thanks for already advancing to the next slide. I'm going to give you a quick evolution of the Stop School Violence program, and then Also provides some information and resources about the additional funds that were provided in 22 with the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. In 2018, BJA's stop solicitations really followed the language of this act, which outlined pretty specifically the purposes for how both BJA and the COPS office were to spend the appropriation. At that time, BJA posted 2 solicitations. One was focused on behavioral threat assessments as well as technology solutions, and one focused on mental health training. Both solicitations had multiple categories. They were based on population. They also included a match requirement. In 2019, the appropriation language provided some discretion in how the money was to be spent. And while we still posted 2 solicitations, importantly, it allowed us to discontinue the match requirement. On the next slide, in FY 2020, BJA broadened the allowable uses of the grant so that training didn't have to be specifically related to mental health, but it could also include training that did things like improve school climate. It also provided support such as anti-bullying training, social emotional learning, and positive behavior interventions and supports, just to name a few. In FY 2021, BJA asked applicants to take more of a holistic approach, and we posted just 1 solicitation that allowed applicants to submit applications that encompassed all of these allowable strategies that you see here. On the next slide. With additional funds appropriated for Stop School Violence under the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, BJA was able to make even more additional site-based awards. In FY22, I also wanted to point out that in addition to the site-based solicitation, which we kept open for a little longer, and like I said, did receive likely dozens of additional applications. What I wanted to mention was we also issued a specialized training and technical assistance solicitation. I'll have a little bit more information about that in a slide or two. And also wanted to mention the partnership. If you could go back 1, thanks. Just this last point here about the transfer and the partnership with the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. In FY22, BJA transferred $25 million to OJJDP for the Enhancing School Capacity to Address Youth Violence program. The goals of that program are to reduce the incidence of school violence through improved school safety and climate, and also to prevent youth violence, delinquency, and victimization within the targeted community of the grant effort. We plan to support OJJDP's efforts again in this area in FY23, pending appropriations. And also important to point out that BJA, OJJDP, and the COPS office all share information about applications and funding recommendations and make sure that we're deconflicting any applications that come in the door. Now to the next slide. BJA under STOP now offers just these 2 categories. So category 1 is really intended for state agencies such as departments of education, state-supported colleges and universities. And then for category 2, that's where we get all other eligible applications. For instance, from local governments, towns, cities, nonprofits, private schools that are nonprofits can come in under that category, and private colleges and universities. We found this really simplified the application process and increased the number of applications that we received. Next slide. Shows the map. Since 2018, BJA has made 542 awards under this program, totaling over $336 million. We've got at least 1 award in every state, and including the territory of Puerto Rico. And on the next slide, I'd like to talk just a bit about, for your awareness, the level of training and technical assistance that's available. In 2019, we partnered with the National Center for School Safety. It's based at the University of Michigan School of Public Health to really help our grantees in the field at large increase their knowledge, skills, and capabilities. Through the center, we've reached out to 100% of our STOP grantees through proactive. They get proactive one-on-one technical assistance. They meet, they do quarterly regional meetings. We have learning communities, and there's a really robust training program that includes webinars, podcasts, training videos, lots of other supports. And important to note that the The team at the center is staffed with educators, mental health counselors, and youth violence prevention experts that combined have an amazing amount of experience in community psychology, educational psychology, school safety, positive youth development, and they're a real asset and resource, not just to our grantees, but to the field at large. Next slide. I mentioned briefly earlier that in FY22, we'll continue with the National Center as funded through 2024. In 22, we also made 2 specialized TTA projects. One's going to focus on building capacity in things like communication for law enforcement, like school resource officers and probation officers who are working daily with school-aged populations. And the other, BJA is going to be able to help stop site grantee schools partner effectively with community violence intervention practitioners. You just heard about our other CVI efforts to really reduce violent crime in and around schools and communities nationwide. And we're hoping to build supports around developing skills and helping students with conflict resolution, with building healthy relationships, and also dating violence prevention resources. And that is it for me for now. I will pass it to Brenda Worthington. Brenda?
Hi, thank you, Ruby. So as everyone mentioned, my name is Brenda and I am an Associate Deputy Director in the BJA Programs Office. So I'm here to tell you today about the Byrne State Crisis Intervention Program. So as you know, the BSCA, which that's new for me, so I'm definitely going to be using that from now on, thank you. So the BSCA seeks to reduce gun violence, save lives, and to make progress toward keeping guns out of dangerous hands. The law also seeks to ensure that Emergency Risk Protection Order programs, or ERPO programs, are implemented in accordance with the Constitution and provide adequate due process protections. Next slide, please. So the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act also made several changes to the Edward Burr Memorial Justice Assistant Grant Program statute. That's our JAG program. So first, a 9th program area was added to the JAG statute for the implementation of state crisis intervention court proceedings and related programs or initiatives. And this is including but not limited to mental health courts, drug courts, veterans courts, and ERPO programs. So I noted before, the minimum programs for ERPO were also added into the JAG statute to ensure that the programs are implemented in accordance with the Constitution and provide the adequate due process protections. Another major change was that civil proceedings, in addition to criminal justice, was added to the general JAG authorization. Previously, JAG funds could only be used for criminal justice purposes, and this is a very huge and significant change in the JAG statute. Finally, the Act added an annual report and evaluation requirement for crisis intervention programs. Next slide, please. Now about the money. The Act appropriated funds specifically for this new 9th program area in the JAG statute for ERPO programs, state crisis intervention court proceedings, and related programs or initiatives. But as Devin noted earlier with her program, this is a completely separate appropriation, and this is completely separate from our JAG funding. The appropriation included a total of $750 million at $150 million per year for 5 years for the Byrne State Crisis Intervention Program, or as we call it, SCIP. In essence, while the Act points to a particular piece of the JAG statute, these Byrne SCIP funds are not JAG funds and have totally separate requirements. Next slide, please. So we posted the solicitation for these formula funds back on October 19th, and the grants.gov deadline for funding is rapidly approaching on Monday, December 12th, as is the Just Grants deadline on December 19th. So the purpose of the formula solicitation that we currently have on the street is to first and foremost implement ERPO programs, state crisis intervention court proceedings, and the related programs or initiatives. So I know it's odd to see the reference to 2 fiscal years in the solicitation title, but the Byrne SCIP formula allocations are statutorily based on the formula allocation for the JAG program, but for the prior fiscal year. This enabled us to combine both the FY 2022 and 2023 Byrne SCIP funding due to the timing. So it's also important to note that these awards will be made to the SAAs for the 56 states and territories, and there are also pass-through requirements that states must abide by. Next slide, please. So a quick overview on eligibility. So this is intended to show that the burn skip eligibility mirrors the eligibility for the state JAG program. So this only SAAs are eligible to apply. And of course, this includes the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, Northern Mariana Islands, Virgin Islands, Guam, and American Samoa. Next slide, please. So as I previously mentioned, the allocations for burn skip are by statute based on the JAG formula allocations for the prior fiscal year, proportionally decreased, of course, for the amount of funds available under the burn skip program in a current fiscal year. So for example, the FY22 allocations for burn skip are based on the FY 2021 JAG allocations, where the FY23 allocations for burn skip are based on the FY 2022 allocations and so on. So since we had the formula allocations for JAG for both FY21 and FY22, we were able to calculate the burn skip allocations for both FY22 and FY23, enabling us to release a combined fiscal year solicitation that included the full 2 years worth of funding. So future solicitations under burn skip will not include multiple fiscal years, and the next solicitation will be for the FY 2024 pot of funds, which will be based, of course, on the FY 2023 JAG formula allocations. The JAG allocations each year are typically not available until the spring or the summer. So I know this might be difficult to see on the slide, but you will notice that there's several different columns in the burn skip allocation sheet. And this is because there's two specific pass-through requirements for states. So the first pass-through requirement we refer to as the direct local pass-through. And states are required to pass through the amount of funding that was available for direct local JAG awards in FY21 and FY22, proportionately decreased for the funds available for burn skip, to the units of local government within the state. This can include, but is not limited to, organizational units within the local government, such as prosecutors' offices, public defenders' offices, law enforcement agencies, or court systems. So this pass-through is mandatory, and there's no waiver that's allowed for this pass-through. So it's important to note that states are not required to pass through to every unit of local government that was eligible for direct JAG awards in FY21 and 22, and have the discretion to pass the local funds through as informed by their Crisis Intervention Advisory Board. And I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. Now, the second pass-through is for the funding that was added to state JAG awards in FY21 and FY22 for units of local government that did not meet the statutory threshold for a minimum eligible award amount from BJA of $10,000. So we refer to this as the less than $10,000 pass-through requirement. So there's a few options for how these funds can be distributed. These funds can be provided to state courts that provide criminal justice and civil justice services to the less than $10,000 jurisdictions within the state, and or the funds can be provided directly to these less than $10,000 jurisdictions. So it could be a combination of several of those options. So unlike the direct local pass-through requirement I previously mentioned, states do have an option to request a waiver for this less than $10,000 pass-through to fund state-level projects that would directly benefit those less than $10,000 jurisdictions. Next slide, please. So here's a bit about what the funds can be used for under the burn skip formula program. So first and foremost, ERPO programs. This is really the highlight of the program, but less than half the states and territories have laws in place for ERPO. Recipients can use funds in a variety of different ways to support ERPO programs. For example, they can conduct trainings for those implementing ERPO programs, such as the judiciary and court staff, family members, and first responders. And recipients can also use funds for program development and enhancement, and for communications, education, and public awareness campaigns around ERPO. Now, understanding that not all states and territories have ERPO laws, funds can also be used for other related programs and initiatives. This includes the specialized court-based programs such as drug courts, mental health courts, veterans courts, including those that accept clients with firearms violations. These funds can go a long way for these programs, specifically because the prohibition against including violent offenders that is currently applied to other BJA programs, such as the adult drug court program, those requirements are not applicable to burn skip. So So in addition to the specialty courts, funds can also be used for behavioral health programs for those at risk to themselves and others. This could include behavioral threat assessment programs, mobile crisis units, specialized training, regional call centers, crisis stabilization facilities for individuals in crisis, and that's just to name a few. And finally, funds can be used by law enforcement agencies to safely secure, store, and track and return relinquished guns. Next slide, please. So I mentioned this earlier, this Crisis Intervention Advisory Board, and this is really a key element in this formula program and is intended to inform and guide the state's initiatives under Burn Skip. In fact, each state's program and budget plan must be approved by the advisory board before funds will be released by BJA for programmatic activities. The solicitation provides a listing of the board's required members, which includes, but is not limited to, representatives from law enforcement, the community, courts, prosecution, behavioral health providers, victim services, and legal counsel. As you'll see on the slide, this list of representatives is intended to be an absolute minimum requirement, and we encourage states to ensure that the representatives on this board from the various potential beneficiaries are included and fairly represented. Next slide, please. So lastly, we have published a very comprehensive, well, at least I think it's comprehensive, frequently asked questions document for the Burn Skip program. And these are available on our website, and we will continue to update this frequently asked questions document as more information is gathered and becomes available. We're always open to suggestions on how we can improve these FAQs. So please feel free to reach out if anyone thinks that there's items that could be better clarified in our FAQs. So this completes my portion of the presentation, and thank you again for joining us. So now I'll pass it back on over to Ruby Kazelbash, who will tell you about the Companion Training and Technical Assistance Program.
Thank you so much, Brenda. That was really informative and helpful. So if we can go to the next slide, this is the Companion Training and Technical Assistance solicitation to the formula solicitation that Brenda was just talking about. It is also open right now. Through the solicitation, we are going to provide support to the field at large in developing capacity. We also specifically are going to provide support to the grantees made under SCIP, the State Crisis Intervention Program, as well as those JAG grantees to choose to spend funds under this expanded purpose area. And there's other purposes included. If we can move to the next slide. I also want to let everyone know, importantly, that there's a webinar tomorrow specifically on this training and technical assistance solicitation for anyone who's interested, but particularly for interested applicants. We are going to put a link to that solicitation webinar in the chat. And I'd strongly encourage folks that if you're interested for even more detail than we're able to provide today, please register and participate, but also know that we will record it and we'll make a recording available within a week or two of that solicitation webinar. So here you can see the three categories for which we're seeking providers. In category 1, we are going to select a provider for up to $2 million to stand up a national extreme risk protection order center. And the center, like I said, is going to assist those Burn Skip state grantees as well as their subrecipients in implementing extreme risk protection order programs. The selected provider is also going to ensure that tools and resources are made available to the field, as well as identify and really promote national best practices and model programs, including the use of validated risk assessment tools. In category 2, we're going to make one award for up to $1 million to focus on courts, on supporting state, local, and tribal courts, really to examine for people who are walking in those courthouse doors the court's current capacity to screen, to assess, to assign to appropriate case processing based on the risk of harm to themselves or others with a firearm. And this can and will include judicial and other court staff training and safety considerations. In category 3, that's a third award, and that award will be for $1 million. And this category and the provider selected is specifically to assist grantees and the JAG grantees as applicable in gathering sufficient information to meet the reporting requirements that were outlined in the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. This TTA provider is also going to provide support around data collection and preparing for potential evaluations on the effectiveness of their state crisis intervention strategies in preventing violence and preventing suicide. On the next slide, just sharing with you that the eligible applicants include national nonprofit organizations, for-profit organizations that waive profit, and institutions of higher ed. These applications are due in grants.gov. It's a two-step process. So in grants.gov, applications are due by January 4th. And in Just Grants, the full application is due January 9th. Again, please stay tuned or tune in to that solicitation webinar tomorrow for even more information. Thank you. And Brent, I will hand it to you to moderate questions.
Thank you, Ruby. And thank you, everybody, for running through those areas with such detail and clarity. For folks watching, just to sum up, we moved quickly here and we were able to award against existing FY22 solicitations for 2 of the programs, STOP grants as well as CVI, which was really incredible because of the demand from the field. And there are 2 solicitations, 3 in fact, as we think about the Burn Skip TTA out on the street now, awarding to the remaining 2 plus the TTA grant programs that are out there. So really moved quickly and thoughtfully. We have 1 question in the Q&A already, and folks are encouraged to use the Q&A function if you have questions. Brenda, I will turn to you on the question from Natalia about Burn Skip subawards.
Sure, thank you, Brent. Hi, Natalia. The question here is it correct that Burn Skip subawards have to each be approved by BJA? What is the purpose of that and how long will it take? When is the earliest the subawards could spend funds? So the answer to that question is yes, you are correct. The subawards must be approved by BJA, but this is actually consistent with the special conditions on all of our awards, which provide for federal authorization to be required for all subawards. So the difference here is that other programs, the subawards are authorized by statute, and in this program, since it is different from JAG, it follows the same process as our other programs. So as far as how long this will take, that's dependent on the information we receive, of course, and we, this is a very high priority program for us, and we will rapidly get through any subaward submissions that we receive to get those turned around as quickly as possible.
Great. Thank you, Brenda. And more questions. Sarah asks, what will be the deadlines for Burn Skip for FY24? My guess is we don't know FY24 deadlines, but Brenda, please let me know if I'm wrong there.
That's absolutely accurate. We will not know because until we have the allocations for the FY23 JAG program, which the FY24 funds will be dependent on.
Thank you, Brenda. And folks can follow along as funding becomes available on BJA's website for this at bja.gov, the open funding opportunities. Is that right? Okay, great. I see head nods, so I'm not giving bad information. Brian asks, can the state governmental agency pass through funds to the court in the INSHIP grant, or does the court have to apply separately for funding? Devin, are you able to shed light here?
I sure am. It's not a one or other. Yeah, we would absolutely love to have one application from the state that includes the state repository and the state court in the same application. However, we understand that in some states that may not be the preferred method to go, and that courts may like to apply separately from the state executive branch. But either option is acceptable to us.
Excellent, thank you. We had a question in the chat from Brian asking if the presentation recording will be available. Melissa, thank you for answering there as well, but want to make sure everyone sees the answer, which is that we will follow up with presentation materials after this session. And we started to get a question, I think, from Joseph. Joseph, if you're meeting to ask us one, we just know that you are curious about Burn Skip, but I don't actually have the question on my screen here, but certainly happy to answer. And of course, want to reiterate that the Burn Skip TTA webinar is being held Friday. And there will be more great information on that one. I am looking at my co-presenters. Anything that I've missed here, or anything that we need to touch on as we give folks just another minute or so as our time begins to wind down in case they have additional questions?
I think we may have also gotten a question on whether we're going to offer a transcript of this event, which I believe we will, but perhaps someone else can answer that.
Yes, thank you. I think we will be following up with materials. I'm not sure if there will be a transcript, but we'll confirm and circle back. Sylvia is asking if a law enforcement agency can apply directly to the Burn Skip grant. Brenda, I'll turn that one back to you.
Great, thank you. So only the SAAs are eligible to apply directly to BJ8 for Burn Skip.
Great, thank you, Brenda. And Caitlin is asking whether we'll be sending a PDF of the presentation we made today. I believe we will be sharing the materials after this. How long can we sit in awkward silence? Have you all tried that before? Because you never want to cut off questions before they come in, and we do have 5 minutes left. So we will leave it open here just in case folks have questions. Don't want to prematurely cut it off.
I think there's one more.
Thank you.
Brenda.
Can you
In
talk?
the chat.
Yeah,
It's, can talk more about the purpose of the Crisis Intervention Advisory Board.
Sure, I can take that one. So that's a really great question. One of the things that we worked quite a bit on as we were formulating this program is wanting to make sure that all of the potential stakeholders were involved in decision making on these funds. So that's really the purpose of the board, is to make sure that that everyone has a voice in the use of these funds.
great. Thank you, Brenda. I am still just scanning the Q&A as well as the chat to see if we have any more incoming here. Again, don't want to prematurely cut off conversation with so many folks who joined us.
Brent, if it's okay, I'll just note that the DOJ program plan for FY23 was posted live this week. So folks, I don't know if Melissa, we could find that and post that in the chat too, but folks can see as we start to, what as the sum total of solicitations that are anticipated to be posted by OJP components and the other grant making components, COPS and OVW, if folks are interested in that.
Yeah, perhaps we could follow up with that afterwards with our follow-up materials as well.
Sure.
All right, so I will take point of personal privilege here with our last 3 minutes and just really thank colleagues from numerous offices. As many of you probably know, OJP has 6 program offices and numerous business offices that really support the work that we do at the Office of Justice Programs. Huge thanks to colleagues at the Bureau of Justice Assistance and to Bureau of Justice Statistics, BJA and BJS, for leading so much of this work. And of course, as you heard, OJJDP and OVC also have done work under the STOP and CBI grant programs. So just tremendous thanks there. And of course, OAAG, the Office of the Assistant Attorney General, is so proud to support these efforts and help our colleagues at program offices. There's one last question, just in the nick of time here. Will more information on models, examples like Baltimore be available on the DOJ website? So this is a CBI related question. Betsy, do you have thoughts on how we might continue to lift up models or share examples of grantees and others doing work in this space?
Yes, it's a great question because we really are trying to learn from the great work that's been happening across the country and be able to translate that, both existing information as well as what we'll be learning in this program. So a little bit more on our plans for the resource center I was talking about. We just made these awards, but over the coming 2023 year, we expect to start doing some conferences and to put together an online website with materials that build on the checklist that Eddie talked about earlier. So I would say for right now, the checklist is sort of a good starting point. And then we'll be continuing to host the webinars we talked about to share that information with the field. And then as we launch our training and technical assistance more formally with those new awards, we'll be building a whole online presence around that work. So we're happy to hear about your interest and definitely plan to share more examples and more resources for the field.
Thank you, Betsy. And the only thing I will add here is the National Institute of Justice is also looking into expanding the research and evaluations space related to CBI, and will be, I'm sure, in coming months and years, having additional information here to help inform the field, in addition to the incredible work that BJA and the TTA providers are doing as well. So with that, we are right up until 1 o'clock. Really appreciate everybody joining us today. Thank you so much, and look forward to continued conversations with you all about this important legislation and the work that we're doing to implement.